yeah, today we're going to be looking at how we can deal with wildfires, looking at it from the water angle. And traditionally, it's just going to be more the carbon cycle angle, but how do we restore the water cycle and hydrate our landscapes? So we'll be having Thomas Price. He worked for CAL FIRE, which is the California Fire group, and also is with the Fire Ecology Network that Jonathan Cabat started. And we also have Monica Guzman from Bolivia, who's doing her PhD in groundwater and wildfires. And she'll be talking about how groundwater can lessen wildfires and also the effect of wildfires on groundwater. And then I'm going to just share a bit about how some of the techniques we can do to kind of hydrate our environment and how we can use groundwater to stop wildfires. Are you ready, Thomas?
When you're ready.
Okay, cool.
So just a little bit more of a capture on my background. I started out and I was going to become a forester, and ended up getting a natural resource science degree and environmental studies and planning with emphasis in hazardous materials management. Because while in my first degree, I actually helped co-create one of the first sustainable forestries called wild iris forestry, which pulled back the paradigm around timber harvest plans and talked about watershed management and ecosystem management as it relates to these timber harvest plans, because a timber harvest plan has land ownership and not systems dynamic connection modalities. I put myself through both degrees as a what was at the time a CDF firefighter, and worked through both wildland firefighting, helicopter medic, then back to Schedule A, Schedule B, on to the point where I was actually doing the LA 38 permits at the time, was what it was called, where we were basically what's now known as Firewise, where they basically try to tell you to clear spaces. And part of the reason I'm speaking to this is because it leads into kind of an important myth that the industry has kind of perpetuated, and now our government perpetuates through Firewise, is that just clearing these defensible spaces, and you got to remember, defensible spaces oriented around a firefighter protecting your structure, not protecting the environment. And that's the kind of the myth. So even as a forester or a beginning wildland firefighter, fuel moisture is one of the first things that you're taught, and to pay attention to fuel moisture. But these Firewise modalities don't, they kind of forget the science, because there's this industry about protecting people's homes and assets, and personhood is really a driving force behind our economy and the way we show up and do things. So I'm not currently a favored speaker in the fire industry, so to speak. I have to enter from the biochar and other modalities, because the idea of coming with big apparatus and clearing spaces and bulldozers is the way we currently fight fires. I'm more of a proponent of what I call regenerative forestry, and that's where we pay attention to how we interact with our environment and build into our environment. There's a subject, so I'm actually at this point a climate master at work. I look at the bigger picture. So heat islands is a subject in the climate change, and our cities and our environments that we kind of co-create, especially with asphalt and other things, create heat islands. And our logging practices in the majority of our society and other agriculture create heat islands, which brings those same things of our hot, dry, basically plant lifeless society modalities into our wilderness modalities. Many of the fires I've been studying for the last 5 years, the bigger ones, have some key components where there's either logging or other clear cutting happening around it that is adding stress to the bigger climate stresses. So there is, climate change and lack of rainfall that occurs in different cycles and systems. But we are adding other heat stressors by monocrop forest growth, where we spray the land and try to grow one species. So fuel moisture is regulated by the allowing of the plant to have, biophilia at its feet. So the more plant life and the more insects and bugs and mushrooms and everything else growing at the feet of these trees that are burning now helps them be more resilient and stand more strong against fire. And where we've removed all that and heat stress these organisms, they are burning. And a lot of times it's the clear-cut secondary and third growth that burns first, but we've left such small strips of old original growth, even if it has a I'm going to use the McKenzie corridor. McKenzie River runs into the Eugene Willamette area. It had these 100-foot beauty strips, which it looked like we had really great old growth up those rivers, but they were all heat stressed because of the forest practices around them on both sides of the river. And so it burned down in what's similar to the Santa Ana winds one year. So we had a couple years of rain not happening at the end of summer and early fall like we usually do in Oregon. And for 10 years, I'd been telling them these winds that you have in late summer, early fall are the same thing that happens in the Santa Ana, Southern Cal region. And if we're ever dry enough, those could push some fire. Well, it eventually, after 10 years, aligned where we had 3 years of drought, no rain at that later period in the summer. And we had it all up and down the Cascade Coast. We had a number of big fires like that. This is just one of them. But most of the fire burned down the slopes through these clear-cut areas that had monocrop kind of growth, didn't have the resilience, and then kind of burned back through the old growth, because once you have all this heat and fire coming down, it dries out what's left of the old growth that's already stressed itself too. And so we lost huge amounts of forest. And at the same time, if you go study some of these areas, there's some amazing, still resilient areas that, because they had the natural ability to capture moisture, stood in this firestorm and are coming back even better. But so we really have the opportunity now to encourage our legislature to not only go out and make these big clearings, but go study the forest. Go study why is some of this standing and held resilient. And you'll find, at least I'm finding, a lot of it is these areas were treated differently and had more of a natural system of resilience within their ecosystem at the forest floor. And so a lot of what I've been doing, other than talking about biochar, is getting people to even take old trees and things and slow down the water on the slopes of our forests, and especially the ones that have been burned over, find ways to embed natural what's left in a way that it'll help capture and recreate. But the biggest thing I want to leave you with, and I'm going to cut this off at this point, listen to the forest. We have so many people that are using, we think we know things because we can Google it. You don't know the forest until you live with it and you work with it and listen to it. And really, you can't tell. I mean, it's just like me trying to tell you, your systems aren't working for you, you need to change this. You can only change yourself because you've started to learn and understand yourself. We can't change the forest or the environment until we've started to actually come in kind of resonance with it and learn about what the environment needs and how we can be of help to it. Later on, I'll be glad to ask questions, but I'd like to hear what the rest of our speakers have to say.
Cool. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much for your perspective and your insight and your sharing about your experience in the field. Yeah, and we'll do questions after the three speakers. So Monica Guzman from Bolivia, who's doing a PhD in groundwater and wildfires, is up next.
First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's it was a really good news for me because I am following really close what you are doing. I just read the alpha essay, was really inspiring. So I am going to introduce myself. My name is Monica Guzman. I am doing a PhD in the VUB, but also I have a teaching position in the Catholic University of Bolivia. So right now I am in Bolivia, and in the next few minutes, I would love to show you a little bit of the research work we have been doing in the Bolivian Amazon and focus more on the things we have learned about all the research and not that much on the methodology and results, because this is quite interesting and complex relationships. I mean, groundwater and wildfires. So the first thing I'm going to do is put some context. We deal with wildfires, of course, and just in August, like you can see here, the Amazon lost 2.5 millions of hectares because of it. It's hard to imagine this number, but if we compare with this amount with soccer fields, we realize that it's quite shocking. Another problem we have related with groundwater, which is our primary source for water supply, is the water scarcity. And the thing is that both issues are increasing on Bolivian Amazon. But the thing is, and the question was if there is a kind of interdependency between them. So let's see, it's challenging at the beginning to see the effects of wildfires on groundwater. But when we see the whole picture through the processes involved on the water cycle, and we look deeply inside them, so we realize the connection between each process, and we find also interesting things. For example, because when you have leaves consumed by fires, you're going to have less rain trapped on them. And because of that, more rain splash that jointly with the soil heating and incrustation of ashes inside the pores, you will have less permeability and more fuel that comes from the dead leaves. So that increased the probability to have another severe wildfires. And that is just one example. We have a lot of processes and interconnections, but the important part is from this graph is that we can understand better that wildfire scenarios are promoting scarcity scenarios and vice versa in a kind of very complex and shocking cycle. Another fact is that not all wildfires are the same. They act different in each process, and the relation is not linear. So I'm going to pass this really fast because there are some boring data, but I want to show you also a little bit of about my study site. This is inside the Bolivian Amazon. We have rocks, we have sandstones, forests, and it's surprising that the rainfall amount is quite large. However, there are scarcity in the zone, and it's because the temperature is high too. So we have a lot of evapotranspiration in the whole year. And well, I would love to just show you some results. This is, for example, some data we have analyzed looking for the past. And you can see that in the last 20 years, we have a decreasement of 30 millimeters because of wildfires and deforestation. And we found some correlations with especially land use change. Then this is another example looking to the future this time. we tried to model that, and we found that we have a decreasement in, if you changing some parameters related with the wildfires, we found some decreasement of recharge rates between 8 and 32%. And well, I think the reflection in our study site is that it's urgent to have and promote a risk-informed decision-making. It's quite important to promote discussion about this effect because it must be included in policies about land use change in the whole Amazon and beyond. Thank you, and if you have any question, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you, Monica. That was great. I really appreciate that. Cool, and yes, and also at the end we can have questions for Monica also. So, oh, Monica, I think, let's see, how do I stop sharing your screen here?
Let me try. I think it's not more.
What do I, oh, does anyone know what I'm supposed to do to?
Yeah, up at the top of the window, it should say stop share. A red button that says stop share.
Okay, cool. And then, cool. And then I'm gonna speak now. Let's see here. Cool, so I'm Alpha, and I'm part of this Regenerative Water Alliance, which I help with, co-found with a bunch of people. And I'm a physicist by training and interested in all these, studying these water cycles on a large scale. And one of the interesting things is there's a fire flood cycle that's happening. So if you look all around the world, we'll see that there's often, there'll be a huge fire, and then there'll be a flood perhaps a couple years later, and then there'll be more fires after that. And what's happening is that the fires are creating, when there's very hot fires, it creates this waxy surface on the soil, and it makes sometimes makes the landscape harder to absorb the rainfall. And so when that happens, when later there's huge rains, they are not absorbed into the landscape as much, and so they'll create huge floods. And then a lot of these floods will pull away the topsoil. And so then in the ensuing years, the land is not able to absorb as much rainfall. And so then you'll have more wildfires again. So the world is in this huge flood fire cycle right now. It's really important we get out of it by regenerating our landscapes, regenerating our soil, replenishing the groundwater, and regenerating our vegetation. And in terms of groundwater, there's an interesting effect that began being studied in the 1980s called hydraulic lift and hydraulic redistribution. What researchers found was that the soil was in many places wet underneath the ground, even when there was no rains. And what was happening is that the tree roots were digging deep down into the ground, sometimes even into the bedrock, to bring up groundwater. And this groundwater was then passed from the trees into the surrounding ecosystem and landscape. So the trees weren't just keeping the water from themselves, they were passing into the soil, so other trees whose roots maybe weren't so deep, or other plants who have short roots, could also get hydrated. And the mycelia was also passing a lot of water around the landscape. So the groundwater actually has a way of hydrating the landscape. And so each foot that we can raise the water table is very important for hydrating the landscape. Different trees will have different root lengths. So some things like blue oak, for instance, can be over 50 feet deep. The roots can go down and even penetrate into bedrock, where sometimes at the tips of these roots, the fungi and mycelia are also helping bring in the water. And the rocks itself can sometimes hold water and store water, especially things like limestone and sandstone. And so what is really important that we increase the groundwater because the landscape has a way of hydrating itself with this groundwater. The problem is that all around the world, we've been draining our groundwater from Europe to South America to Australia to North America. The groundwater is being taken out. I mean, in California, the ground is actually collapsing, you know, many feet because of all the groundwater has been drawn out. And Los Angeles, like it used to be, if you do a little well, the well would just spout out water into the air because the groundwater was just beneath the surface. But now the groundwater is all being drawn out. So our landscapes are no longer so fire resistant. And so what we really need to do is start looking at replenishing our groundwater. And so in California, there's a sustainable groundwater management act that just got implemented a couple of years ago that now is recognizing we need to start looking at groundwater. And California's a bit slow behind other US states who have already started looking at this. So, but it's still not being replenished very much. And so it's really important that we focus on this. And each landowner has a lot of things they can do. Like if you put swales or check dams, which are like rocks, if you're on a sloped surface, to catch the rainwater on your land and funnel it into the ground, that will help. And if you can get 100 of your neighbors to do the same thing, then you're going to replenish the groundwater in your area and, you know, and lower the wildfire risk in your area. And also if you can increase the soil quality, because if you have more organic soil, it absorbs a lot more water. And each little grain can actually, because of the suction force, it can hold water for quite a long time. So if you can increase the organic content in your soils, and you could do this by compost teas or mycelial compost teas. There's all sorts of ways, and permaculture has a lot of techniques to regenerate your soil. So if you can get all your neighbors to actually regenerate your soil or work together, then that can be very helpful for dealing with wildfires. And in addition, we want to really get big agriculture, big ag, to shift from a lot of their synthetic fertilizer and pesticide ways of dealing with soil, which degrades their soil. So all these vast farmlands are absorbing a lot less rain. And then they have these tile drainage underneath the soil that drains away the water. So big ag is a huge cause of wildfires. And because we funnel away so much water with our dams and aqueducts to big ag and also to our urban environments, we're taking a lot of this water away from the wilderness. And so wildfires happen there a lot more. I mean, all the water that gets funneled to big ag has to come from somewhere else. And so those landscapes are not being hydrated. So we have to really realize that big ag is a big cause of wildfires and really focus on that. And also, I think focusing on the messaging of groundwater. So like perhaps groundwater quenches wildfires is like a slogan. So, so yeah, so with that, I'll end my little talk here. And yeah, let's open it up for questions for Thomas, Monica, me, or just for general discussion between everyone.
I was really interested in this narrative that fuel load reduction can create risks. Is there a way to differentiate the kinds of fuel load reduction that increases the risk of catastrophe versus the kind that is resilience compatible, regenerative forestry compatible in context? I mean, goats reduce fuel load, but maybe not in a way that creates cataclysmic risk the way you're describing around forest health, but maybe 10,000 bulldozers might have a different result, obviously. So I'm just trying to understand that layer that was shared. Thank you so much. This is Bobby from Crowd Doing Wildfire Prevention, and delighted to be in dialogue with you.
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, Bobby's doing a lot of work around wildfire prevention and bringing a lot of people together. I'll let Thomas field this question.
Well, thank you, Bobby, for your question. And yeah, basically that's the other thing is people get reactionary around, well, I'm making money or I'm finding a way to survive now doing fuel reduction. One of the things that fuel reduction needs to look at is how we're reducing the fuels and what we're doing. I did a Butte County has a fire council, and I did some events with them and had several versions of fuel reduction, pile burning, ring of fire burning, and other things demonstrated in front of the public. And then I had Cal Fire come in and do what they do for fuel burning beside us. And they basically return things to ash. And when you return things to ash, there's not enough nutrient value or biochar or anything left in the pile to regenerate anything in those circles where they do that. And so the industry likes very simple. I don't want to watch it. I don't want to spend money on manpower or person power to, or even water to extinguish. And so all these equations of money have us do things in a way that's the most simple, the least cost effective, or cost outlay for our society at this moment. But you in these places that pile burn or fuel burn to ash, you sterilize the ground below it. You don't have a good relationship with the earth and the soil. Fire actually moves through in a less sterile manner most of the time in our biomes. It naturally doesn't burn up everything. It naturally kind of leaves waste behind. It leaves seeds behind. The way it burns with air movement and other systems dynamics that can be regenerative in itself. But when humans burn, a lot of times we burn to get rid of stuff and make it gone. And when you burn that hot and intense all the way to ash, you basically destroy the soil below. So it's mostly, our soil practices across the board from ag to forestry have not continued to pay attention to the systems that they interact with and how they need to be in relationship with them to maintain the water and moisture in those systems. And that's kind of, I can go into it more, but that's the quick overview from my point.
Cool.
Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you so much. It was very, very useful. May I ask another question?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. So, Alpha, you spoke about this new law to do something so that the land is not so dry. You mentioned some kind of law or something. Then California is a little slow to work on it or something.
Oh, no, just that the Sustainable Ground Management Act, California is now realizing that we've been draining our groundwater too much. So now they're focusing on working with different counties to replenish our groundwater, and also making sure people don't use up too much of the groundwater.
I see. And because in our area, like if I drive on the way coming to work today, also whole hills, those hills are so dry, and even those areas that it's natural, it's very, you can see it's very, very dry. And nowadays, like after wildfire, in the past they were leaving as it was, but now they are clearing those burned material off, and after that it's becoming like a desert. And to whom, if some people we want to talk to, like a government or something, like with those kind of things, to whom to talk to?
I'm not sure. Does anyone else know?
Well, there's multiple segments in what you just asked. So first, I would like to start to address first the desertification of areas. Even in deserts, we can actually get forests to come back. It takes some applying material and time and a little bit of thinking around water and frost and our everywhere in air. And this is what plants know, is plants can actually take moisture out of what we consider dry air, because for air to be stable, it has moisture in it. Otherwise, we couldn't breathe. And there's ways to encourage the capture or deposit of water in your ecosystem. They've even done studies on how rocks move in deserts, and it's actually water and hydro cycles that are around frost and evening freezes that move these rocks. So there's water everywhere. It's a matter of what do we do to encourage it to be captured and brought into our groundwater and into our systems? As far as I could probably come up with a publication of your area, but I would start with any of your county and state officials as far as who to talk to. There should be water boards in all over California, which is another place to have a good conversation, but I can give you more lists later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Poyom.
Yeah, I'll just to add on to what Thomas said, answering Yoshi's question about who to contact. I think in our area, the county supervisors is one place to start also. This issue of the clearing or the prescribed burns and how that affects the hydrology and how much water there is in the system, I think is really interesting. I'm definitely was really interested in the presentation earlier. I think it was Monica. I'd love to hear more about your methodology that you used, because it's such a complex issue in the Sierra Nevada where we live, where what Thomas mentioned with how the forest has regrown in this sort of monocrop or even just continuous sort of density. And some of the research that I'm seeing coming out is starting to show that the best sort of, as far as wildfire goes, the healthiest forest conditions are have a certain amount of like what's called heterogeneity or like clumpiness to the forest. So there's open spots and then denser spots and the open spots. And because our forest has been mismanaged, that natural clumpiness that would evolve through sort of consistent fire patterns, low severity fire patterns, isn't allowed, it hasn't been allowed to continue to evolve. And so how do we get back to that place? Seems like a difficult question to me. And maybe Thomas, I would be interested to hear what you have to say about what kind of, and this kind of gets back to what Bobby had asked, what kind of methods should we be using? Because, you know, it's clear, yeah, the masticators, they come in and just destroy everything and leave a wasteland behind. And that's not healthy. And then I've even heard people talking about how they're upset about the prescribed burns. Oh, we're trying to increase the amount of prescribed burns, but this is going to cause this big problem. But it's hard to see what other ways could we use to sort of get the forest back to a place where it can handle fire in a way that's not going to be damaging to the forest, because the fire is going to be here. We're not going to be able to stop wildfires. And so how can we create conditions to allow for the fire to be a low severity fire that won't sort of be really damaging? So hopefully that was clear enough what I'm asking.
I have some comments maybe about the methodology I used. Thank you very much for your feedback. The thing is that we use numerical model, water balance models, but the challenging thing was to change some parameters, the most sensitive ones, in a post-fire scenario. So something we found is that we have a lot of information. For example, in some biology journals, there are a lot of research about how change the some specific parameter about the vegetation in a post-fire environment. So we use that, I mean the equation, the empirical equation, and then in another work, in another journal about soil mechanics, we found some equations also about how the hydraulic conductivity change after wildfires. So the thing is that we use all this information to build the model. Then we calibrate the model, and we found some diverse scenarios. And maybe it's useful, something that we are going to do in the next phase, because we have now some recharge, groundwater recharge maps, and now we know in which areas we have more infiltration. So we are going to propose artificial recharge in that specific areas in order to increase the groundwater recharge and the humidity of the unsaturated zone. And then we will measure all of it and we will see what happened. Yeah.
And the model that you created, the water balance model, do you think that's applicable across regions, or is that, I mean, is it the model such that I could take that model and change some of the parameters to fit my local region? Or do you think those post-fire parameters are specific, this post-fire sort of equations or pieces of the model, do you think those are specific to the Amazon?
No, I think you can use it. I think the most important thing are the parameters, which are already available in different journals. And the thing you can do to try to predict the impact of wildfires on groundwater in the future is apply your own model, groundwater model, but use these post-fire parameters. So I think that could be an interesting option. Not focus on the model, because there are many and every region have their favorites, but focus on the parameters and see what happened in the model. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could also address so I do some computer flow modeling, and I would actually be interested in working with you to look at your parameters and see how they cross over. It is important to check your, I don't know, data and things that generate the models can shift. My main thing is you were asking, ways to apply things. I feel it's always important to be each watershed, each basically hillside exposure, depending on whether it's southeast, west, north, and there's different soil types. So treating one piece of land like another is always problematic as far as I'm concerned. You need to know your biome, your microbiome, how it's relating to the fire damage it's had on its own as a baseline, what it's done in the past fires, if you get anyone that can give you some history. There is areas have their own resilience. I'm really cautious on people that try to talk about replanting fire resilient types of vegetation. Many of those fire resilient types of vegetation actually are more susceptible to fire. And it's like, why are we changing the environment when we don't really know what's happening in any way? We haven't done enough science. And that's my thing, is a lot of times we're applying things that we think we know, but have we really done the science to know what we know? Have we really proven or created some proofs that give us some leading data to at least suspect that we're actually heading in the right direction? And more often than not, because of the profit-driven society we live in, you got to see who's paying the money. I mean, even that map, that link that was in here recently about the SFA 22 SFA applications and support had a map of different lands. And right now, nonprofit and conservancy trusts, because of money they're receiving from grants, end up turning over their water rights to government and corporations unknowingly, because in the fine print, there's a lot of money trying to make money off of what the government influences. And so it's like, we need to take a pause, pay attention to the land we're in, get enough people that live in the land that want to invest in the land, especially the indigenous people that were part of that land to begin with, and collectively hold the land in a relationship manner that we're in relationship. Because for those of you that don't know, I have some indigenous heritage. All my relations doesn't mean just all my human relations. It means all my relations, the land I live on, the land I'm born into, the land I'm part of, and all its plants, animals, and soil are all my relations. And I have a relationship with all of them. And until I recognize that I have a relationship with all of that, I don't begin to steward anything. And I think we even need to change the steward term. You need to start by listening to and having a relationship. There is no steward. You are part of this system. What part of the system do you want to be in vibration with, and how do you want to dance?
Cool. Thank you, Thomas. Paul, you have a question?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Thomas, for sharing that. That was really inspirational. And I actually have two questions. One is for Monica. The question is of the Bolivian government. What is their stance on, I guess I should ask first, what would you say the percentage of fires are in the Amazon that are human caused or where they're burning for agricultural use versus wildfire? And then what is the government's stance on burning for agricultural use?
Thank you for your question. Actually, about 90% of the wildfires are because the land use conversion by fire, because we have this quite common practice in Bolivia. And the thing is that the permissions to do this are given in order to, they see the social and economical aspects. For example, the number of people who lives in a small community, there is beyond a limit, they have permission to burn and just do agricultural activities in that piece of land. So it's all about social and economical aspects, prioritizing the food sovereignty. So that's a huge problem in Bolivia, because we need that decisions are based in science, in the knowledge of how damaging could be in some specific areas, in one more than others have a wildfire. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is that really a solution that's being proposed by the government, that burning is to create agricultural land is something worthwhile doing compared to preserving the biodiversity?
I think the main issue is that we are a poor country, and this is the easiest way. So government try to support the small communities doing that. I think
right.
that is the main reason, but it's quite damaging for the environment, of course.
Right. Right. I can see that. Okay. Well, thank you, Monica, for your presentation. It's really eye-opening. And my second question is for Thomas, just in regards to the context or the humidity, preserving humidity within the forests. How do we gauge, or how does one gauge the use of an effective understory burn on the humidity
Hello.
of a particular landscape.
Thank you. Thank
Oh.
you.
Someone got a delivery. So Thomas, that's what I'm curious about, is the effect of those types of burns on humidity of a forest, and what type of decision making goes into doing that.
So humidity and the whole water cycle is humidity just one part of the whole water cycle. A lot of what I talk about is fuel moisture. And so there's many different types of fuel, both the growing tree all the way down to its discards on the forest floor. What I'm going to point to, which may not be the answer you're wanting, you can actually measure stream output in a systematic way. And that's how I know some of the older mature forests actually have better capture and better release. Because I've been able to measure the forest floor and the moisture in the forest floor and the runoff. And runoff in a fog can increase in your stream in a healthy forest environment, where if you've cleared it all out and have nothing, you don't get the same kind of capture by the leaves and drop to the forest floor sponge effect, as I call it, where the sponge kind of dumps off its extra into the stream, and you get higher peak flows during rain events, where so there is no delay in your flow from the beginning of the rain event. It peaks higher and faster. So those are, to me, the numbers that I look towards to see the health of the watershed and how much it's capturing. You can measure you know, your coolness and dew point in a forest canopy and track and monitor that. It's and it's something we all feel when it's like it's 10 degrees cooler in here than it is out there. That's basically the forest itself not only shading you, but it's breathing in and dropping that moisture down. That's why many of the energy modalities like Reiki talk about the forest wash or the forest shower, clearing and cleansing your energy. But those are kind of all just asides. There hasn't been a great deal of energy or interest put into documenting all this. There's a few of us natural resource scientists and fire scientists that are doing some of the work on the edge, but it's not been substantiated and have a whole lot of data points, so to speak, or collaboration on you know, the hypothesis that I'm putting out here, that we need to make sure we have diverse biophilia at the floor of the trees, otherwise they're going to just burn. But you can actually also get supporting data from rings and ring growth, tree growth. They grow different and better, both with biochar, their feet. And the other thing is, a lot of times people will think burning might be bad and they'll just clear and ship. It's actually creating the right environment that brings it together with biological life, like the insects and the mycorrhizals. You can't just chip an area and have the same thing either. You got to get that soil immersion with biological life for that sponge effect to actually happen, that I call it sponge effect. But hopefully that somewhat answered your questions, but
yeah, I guess my only other question would be, then when there is a low intensity prescribed fire, then how beneficial is that to that lower part of the canopy where you're trying to keep humidity and foster that biological life?
So low intensity prescribed fire can, and I've had many examples where skunks through and gets rid of some of the older debris and actually makes it more available to the microbiome as nutrients. There's not a whole lot of supporting data as far as someone tracking that kind of thing, but you can see the regrowth in the within a year's time. It doesn't look like you've done a whole lot to the environment, but there is less of a fuel load for dry dead debris. I'm always I'm never anti-fire. I'm never anti use of tools and removing dead stuff. A lot of times when I remove dead stuff, I try to get it to be put into the ground as opposed to remove it. I'm, I take and separate ladder fuels and create fuel breaks all over the United States where I work, but I try to intentionally do it in a way that is not opening up the area to a lot of sun. It can easily heal itself in small, micro healings. I think you were the one that talked about the different patterns and forest. Every tree that falls in the forest creates a new opening for sunlight and new growth. Those kind of patterns are what we need to create, is as small openings, small breaks, small fire. I mean, even a small strip of fire that burns through an area heals back. If it's naturally systematically repairing itself, that's one thing. If it's taking 10 years and still barren and desert now and hasn't come back, we've done things wrong. And I see a lot of that throughout our California and Oregon and other states.
Yeah, agreed. And it's these micro actions, right? These acupuncture points that you work in that are and even without the science, you do have several thousand years of indigenous practices. So thank you for answering that question. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating this conversation. I just had to clear our property, which had been pasture land on a slope and was so overgrown with dead fire hazard debris that there was no way to mitigate it other than to clear the undergrowth. And now the question is, how do we steward it back into a proper relationship? Thomas, thank you for your perspective. I think it's essential that we recognize that we are just an element of the cycle of life. However, I think humans have done so much harm that we actually do have to cultivate a relationship of stewardship and in fact, come together as a network of stewards, because we have a small window of opportunity currently before we're really facing significant cascading systems change of our ecological and social systems. And so the idea of stewardship, even in talking to the indigenous of the Amazon, they're saying, I mean, they've existed as part of the system for eons, right? And they've not destroyed the forest. They said, we've never destroyed the forest, but we don't know how to bring it back. And so I think that this is a really important conversation that I would love to open up for us in terms of our evolving relationship as humans and becoming more stewards of the natural world, because we've caused such massive altering of the natural systems. There's very few intact ecosystems remaining. So how do we retain what remains, but then also regenerate what we've lost? And that takes a mindset of stewardship. So if it's not stewardship, then what is it? And let's evolve that concept and ourselves as a species as we move forward, because we have to put in place the biodiversity. I have a new understanding that I'm just looking into, that the aerosols that create clouds come from the biodiversity of an ecosystem, that the monoculture that we're imposing on the planet, whether it's asphalt, whether it's city urban scapes, whether it's monocropping of our industrial agriculture, that doesn't, even if there's plants on the ground, if it's not a balanced biodiverse system, it's not creating the aerosols within the trees to create the rain, to create the clouds, to bring the water down to the ground. So I'd be interested in hearing either Thomas or Monica's reflections on that. Thank you.
Monica, would you like to go first?
Yes, thanks. I think the reflection is quite important, and it's a long way. We are starting to try to make sensibilizations campaign to protect our forests, and especially to some capacity building about fire management. Because the thing is that it's a fact that most of the fires start because of the men, but in the Amazon is not quite intentional. You know, a small community is just getting rid of some hectares and the fire is out of control, and that's the big issue because the fire spread really, really fast. So I think one strategy we have is try to capacity. I mean, the government is doing some courses and capacity buildings about fire management. And also from the academics where I'm working, we are trying to get to know better the strategic areas, because we know that we cannot go into that point that there is a restriction and nobody is going to be able to just remove forest by fire. But for now, we wanted to protect some strategic areas, and strategic areas for us are areas where we have a lot of recharge, and from that recharge, a lot of people is living. So that's what we are doing right now, but it's a long way. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you, Monica. Those are important points.
I'm not sure I understood the recharge part, but I'm not going to go too much into that. The stewardship thing I just want to address is I'm not saying we don't need to be stewards. There's too many people I find out there, especially in the Forest Service and other, it's kind of like cultural appropriation. People think they're being stewards because they're applying their own thought to, and our systematic white thought is very biased, and they don't see their blinders. So that form of stewardship I'm not a proponent of, and that's why I'm speaking about stewardship. It's not stewardship in a lot of environmental modalities isn't a bad thing, but if you're not wrestling with what you're doing, if you're not thinking about the ramifications, I sent a number of links in the chat for those that want to save them, but one of them is one of the local groups doing some forest stewardship regenerative stuff with swales and dams, and trying to make a whole area capture more water. And they're wrestling with, you know, how much do we use big, it starts out with him basically wrestling with his issues of not liking to use big equipment in the forest. And if we're not wrestling with things, we're not actually being good stewards. We need to be asking the questions, and asking sometimes the hard questions. Is what I'm doing really having the outcome I want? And are we really in alignment with what the ecosystem needs? And that's the other thing is one of the things that I just spent July with a group called Fairy and Human Relations Congress, and they're a kind of environmental group that understands that there's more systems happening in our forest than just us. And so you plant what is the best biodiverse planting into an area that you're trying to steward and restore, the animals will then start to, and sometimes it feels like the unseen beings start to actually help you co-create and steward that land. We are stewarding with a system and within a system, so we can bring our best intentions and the systems will actually start to take over, and we need to let go and let them take over sometimes, and let the birds bring in the new seeds or the right seeds from the area. The squirrels will bury seeds. It's not just us doing it, but we do need to do a lot of reparation for what we've done, both to the indigenous as well as the indigenous land.
Cool, thanks. Just
Thank you.
because you
Thank you,
needed
Thomas.
clarification around the recharge, and maybe Monica could just clarify. I assume what you're talking about, Monica, is that there's places you're recharging in Bolivia, both natural and artificial, where you're taking the water from the wet season, maybe it's behind dams, and flooding the farms and flooding the area so that it seeps into the groundwater and recharges the groundwater. Is that what you were talking about, Monica?
More specifically, like we have a aquifer made from rocks, so we have a really complex connection between fractures. The thing is that some specific areas are really important for recharge because we have more recharge, especially for the fractures, and we have other parts that doesn't have good infiltration conditions. So we are trying to identify the more significant recharge areas to start from there and try to protect that areas and try to, in the best scenario, put some kind of infrastructure to stop a little the runoff, because we have erosion problems too, and give the water some time to infiltrate. So that's what I meant. I don't know if it's clear or.
Yeah, I understand now. At the end of the talk, it was a little bit out of context, so I was having trouble connecting it with the two. I thought that's what you were meaning, but yes. And recharge has actually been used in our society in both good and bad ways in the past. Recharge is used to actually push out natural gases and other things. And we've recharged with wastewater and other less clean stuff too. So yeah, I'm currently working with one of the fire scars. There's a little place called Brighton Bush, where
after these fires.
I'm currently competing with someone else that's got their mic off. But anyway, they're basically have a year-round stream in their area, and basically the idea or the thought idea is we can take some of that year-round stream and kind of sprinkle it and create better humidity, because right now there's nothing holding. It's lost the majority of the forest canopy. There's nothing really, so it's like more exposed, more hot rock than it was forest now. And is there ways that we can take that ongoing stream and kind of put it back out on the land and create some coolness and some moisture for these plant life? And so we've actually created these big fire cannons that do kind of like early morning sprinkles and lay in some more of that water on the land to recharge or kind of add moisture where the desertification of the large fires that came through have left it barren and without a lot of resilience to have moisture and to regrow.
Cool, thank you. Jan, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm wondering about post clear cut regeneration. That it feels that a lot of energy in terms of trying to save forests, and especially by activists in terms of blockades and encampments, and they work and work and work to try to stop the area from being logged, and then it gets logged and clear cut, and then people leave in defeat and leave this area behind, and it's of course totally changed everything about the biome of the area. And so I'm just wondering, maybe there's already something written, I'm not seeing we're short of time here, about how the next stage, okay, we've lost that phase, what was the next stage of how to take care of that or regenerate that land, knowing that it's going to come up with some new growth probably, but both in terms of the fuel that's left on it and the moisture that's been depleted from it. Are there some ways that people can do the next stage of caretaking of that forested area after they've lost the battle of trying to stop it from being clear cut in the first place?
Thomas, did you want to take that?
So I know in Oregon, there's a group in the 70s that started dealing with this, and they were called the HODADs. Really, it's a matter of creating collectives that try to invest in getting human dollars, human time, attention to putting back into what we took out of an area. That resource intensive, extraction needs to be met with some sort of resource input. And mostly they leaned on the forest lands monocrop kind of orientation. So they mostly replanted in forest, and that's what created some of our first forest replanting regulations. I'm aware of more of our, I'm glad everyone's sharing their emails to connect, make sure and save your chat. But the thing that I'm trying to point to is what we need is more of a biodiverse replanting of these forests, as well as work from the edge on in, say a older forest got clear cut. That edge still has a lot of the what I call the microbiological knowledge of the area, and help that be fostered to come back and heal that wound. And that's the orientation of the regenerative forestry I try to put forward. Jamaica Stevens was on this call originally, and I'd love to see her talk in the future. She seemed to leave the call fairly early after the 3 presentations, but there's resources and people on this call that if we get together, we can start creating better ways to do this stuff. So I would encourage you to try to network and continue to create a network through this group here.
Cool, thanks. I think Jamaica, did Jamaica leave her email? I'm not sure she did. Or you could contact me and then I could pass stuff on to Jamaica too. She's a part of this RWA group.
Yeah, her and I are also, we've been part of Tribal Convergence Network and a whole bunch of other things that we wrote, or I was a party to the the book that was published by the Tribal Convergence Network. Anyway.
Oh yeah, the Rebuilding the Village thing.
Yeah, Re-inhabit the Village. There we go. There's the right title.
Yeah, cool. That was a great book. Leah, you have a question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I work with permaculture here in California, so I'm pretty familiar with a lot of these concepts, but I also live in the WUI in a 130 or so home neighborhood that is working with a variety of folks to try to write a CWPP. And so I'm wondering, these concepts are so important, and but how do you translate this to kind of actionable items that homeowners can work with? I mean, we are surrounded by forest land that is not, we don't have control over, mid-pen land and things like that. And then obviously there are many homeowners who own and therefore have control over what goes on their own acre, half an acre, quarter of an acre. But is there some sort of guide to some best practices for rehydration? Because within our community, a lot of the conversations are about defensible space and fuels management, and everyone's talking about clearing, clearing, clearing. But how do you recommend that a community go about gathering some resources to educate folks on how to maintain defensible space, but in a way that fosters rehydration?
I would say rehydration and slope shade aspect. So I've been working a lot with Paradise and Butte County Fire. Most of that fire burned through houses more than it did the forest, because most of it had defensible spaces. And one of the things that we don't realize that we're doing with our houses, we're putting heat pumps now on what used to be the cool side of the house and creating a dryness to that side of the house. Our houses now are basically sunned tinder boxes that might be defendable, but they burn really quick and easy in these climate changing environments. So yeah, finding ways, and I know that the new rules or new guidance by Firewise is that 5-foot zone around your house, and right now they're pretty much encouraging mineral soil in that 5-foot zone. That doesn't change the fuel moisture and actually the moisture of your house and its availability to burn. The right shade trees on the right side of your house, reducing some of the sun heat in the area, that getting tall trees back in place in small little groves, as well as working with, so there's a group in California doing inoculated biochar to help regenerate those microbiomes, and finding ways to inoculate them with your local mycelia is important. I just put a Living Future biome biophilic design thing that talks about it, bringing it all the way into cities and changing our climate issues. It's hard to create one off, every household do this. There are small things that they can do, and we are working at trying to publish that kind of stuff in the near future, but no one really has a handle on it, so to speak. I wish I could give you the playlist of answers. We're still working on it in Paradise, 5 years after the biggest fire that they've ever experienced.
Thanks. Leah, Leah, where in California are you?
Sorry, it's on mute. I'm in the Santa Cruz Mountains, not too far from Los Gatos.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we're doing the Regenerable Alliance is also putting these watershed wisdom councils on, and so that will be on September 13th. And so we're basically working to try and get our neighborhoods. So you can check in about your neighborhood, but also figure out how you start organizing your neighbors and what they can do. And yeah, I mean, as Thomas is saying, it's not necessarily a list, but like just to maybe as a draft of a possible list of things landowners can do is swales, because the swales are little ditches that guide the water into the land, check dams, terraces, and then the mycelial compost tea and the compost tea, like ways to increase your soil. And then maybe you can get your neighborhood to do things like curb cuts and other stuff, so that all the water's not running straight to the ocean.
Right.
Kind of. So basically, different ways you can raise the water table, like in Santa Cruz.
The simplest thing is, how can you slow down water and let it live on your land longer, or live in your land longer? And that's what we're such a society that tries to push it off. There was a mention of I can't remember which one of us mentioned the agricultural practices, but part of the reason that agriculture is so water intensive is because they don't hold water. They have this way of using it and then not wanting it to pull up or create root rot or whatever, so that pushes it off. So it's all set up in a system that just is about runoff and moving water from here to there to water the plants temporarily instead of have it be part of the environment. When our land doesn't have any nutrients, so to speak, in it to hold the water, you just have it filter through it's more like, yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna stop there.
And also, on the USGS, the US Geological Survey, you can look at the groundwater levels, say in Santa Cruz, and then you can work together, get a movement in Santa Cruz where you're trying to raise the groundwater level, say 5 feet or 10 feet, and that should have an impact on wildfires. And maybe
Thank
also
you.
get the local government to get into this. Cool.
Thanks.
Nathan.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have kind of a compound question that builds on both Thomas and Monica's experience. I'm working in Southern California in San Diego County on Palomar Mountain, and we're doing some headwater restoration and using these methodologies that are built on traditional ecological knowledge to hold the water, slow it, capture it. And then we're on the edge of agroecology, right? Building in orchards and working with sheep and goat to help manage the ecology. And right now, what I'm anticipating, and I'm curious on Monica, on your side of, are you using LiDAR to capture the data in regards to aquifer potential or spring potential, water holding capacity potential? And because I'm thinking about this component when we're applying our methods, because we have historic springs on site. And so our intention and thought is that if we apply the management of our oak forests in a way where we're thinning and reducing to help us balance the loss of trees that are being caused by the beetles and drought and just hyperdensity, and leveraging, Thomas, I am really curious to know your feedback on the idea of as much as possible incorporating the material into the ground and using it in that way of creating our check dams and laying it across potential creek zones and things like that. And, you know, in combination of stuff on the surface versus stuff actually buried. And, you know, how can we focus this energy in headwater zones? And is that because from my ideas, it seems like the most impactful and logical start for applying these methodologies. And I'm working with tribal communities as well to hopefully find that balance between places where cultural burns could happen versus that buffer zone between the headwaters and forests and springs. And so I'm just curious kind of some of those feedbacks on those thoughts.
So thank you for your question. Actually, this first part of the study, we focus on the permeability and the hydraulic conductivity and other parameters that we realized are quite important and or more sensitive. And we didn't use such high resolution. But I think for this next phase, we are focused on artificial recharge. We are going to need, for example, LiDAR and other technologies. So far, I don't have much expertise about LiDAR and this kind of resolution. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Yes, LiDAR is a
Thank
wonderful tool, but I have to say there's many. So one thing that's sticking in my head is the use of words, and you even mentioned capture in your capture in a good way. There's an intentionality of slowing down and having water held on the land. We in our human modality like to dam up things and add captures that may not be as effective. I do like your pointing to the headwaters. That one YouTube video I put is doing it in a headwater of an area. So it's an easier place to get a foothold in a headwater than to put big dams downstream to slow things. I also try to look at how did water move through an area before we start to build and channel it. Is there a way we can bring water back out into an area? And the other thing in so in our food industry, which is part of our ag, we create a lot of pits and other byproducts that could be actually turned into biochar and put back into as nutrients into these lands that we are taking from. There's also ways to make agriculture understand how putting some of this stuff back will also help hold and capture water long-term, so they don't have to use as much. And some of these places are figuring this out. Even some of the wineries are getting some of this cutting edge conversation added to their educational modalities, but it's not across the board yet. And we need to keep the conversation going.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we're working with our local resource conservation district to pilot a project where we're managing the understory so that we can bring that material back to the ground, because we're finding just a lack of organic matter within our soil matrix. And so, yeah, so just that's been kind of our process of thought, is that by bringing it down and allowing it to integrate and addressing the dead and dying trees and reducing the infections and overall looking at the forest stand as a living system, and just going through those restorative efforts is it seems very appealing, because it's not being talked about or researched a lot. So I'm glad to see that you're actively involved in some of those components, and I look forward to seeing some of the videos and other things you've shared. So thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like Ben Amara put a question in the chat.
Oh, I don't see it. What's the question?
It says if fires are caused naturally by the drought and desertification of the environment, or is it necessary that there is at the start a human arsonist to start these fires?
I have a comment. Well, I operate from, there's much to be learned from indigenous people, but one particular example is that fire can be good, is that Native Americans managed the landscape in what is now America by what we would call prescribed burning. So fire is not bad all the time, but we have let our environment go so far without burning that we now have our fires are catastrophic. That means anything, but so I not all fire is bad.
Yeah, we're not saying, yeah.
And
we're not saying that.
Fire is an important part of the natural cycle.
And to answer her question, the more humans, the more fire will happen. It's not always an arson that causes fire. I'm not sure why the big thing on chains is so pervasive that they're now talking about you dragging your chains and starting fires. To me, in my history, people's chains on the highway is not what's actually starting most of these fires, but that became a new popular thing that you'll see on all your reader boards going through California and Oregon, especially on the highways. Fire is caused a lot by humans, a lot more these days than it used to be. I think, unfortunately, some of it is even caused by people that go out and fight fires, because if there's not enough fires, there's not enough income streams for those that are employed in that temporary modality. That being said, that doesn't mean that all fires are caused by pyros that want fire and want to go fight the fires. There's many aspects of fire. Fire is a natural part of our environment through lightning. And basically, I've even seen animals have other ways of co-creating fire or moving fire, but it's not common that our natural environment does it in a manner that is in the middle of summer and moves huge fire through the plains. Right now, our modality of actually exiting after a fire and all the exhaust in a mass evacuation helps embers last longer and move further in fire. And that's something that we haven't even started to talk about in our society.
Well, thank you everyone for a very rich and informative discussion today. And thank you especially to Monica and Thomas for coming and sharing your expertise.